Hello, everyone. We are now live tonight here with Damian Boeselager, our MEP at the European Parliament, elected with Volt in Germany in 2019. Hi, Damian.
Hi, Duarte.
How are you doing? You're welcome.
I'm good. I'm a bit tired, as you can maybe see. I don't know because I had a full week in Strasbourg. Where I'm still sitting in my very small office. It's like in Strasbourg, they're all like very shoeboxy, and that's why I have lots of boxes there. But so I'm a bit tired from a long plenary week. Macron was here this week, which was very interesting, and he said a bit like what his ambitions are for the next 6 months, when he's basically in charge of like the heads of state of government, or heads of government and state and so on. Yeah, so it was intense, but I can tell you all about it if you want.
That's excellent to hear. Yeah, I saw on your social media what was going on in the European Parliament with the French presidency and with Macron. I think that sounds quite promising. Today we will be also, and thank you before I start on introducing this event. Thank you for, in the midst of this busy week, to be here with us. It's very great to have an MEP in the midst of our electoral campaign, and especially for us that are Portuguese immigrants across Europe. It's great to be able to have you here and to speak to a member of the European Parliament. The idea for today, for all of those that are joining in as we go on in this live, is to have an informal chat where we will be talking about the EU and how the European project is so important for migration within the EU, particularly for us Portuguese. We are the country in the European Union that has the highest proportion of nationals living in the EU relative to those that live in the country, and this has been motivated by large social inequalities across the EU. So we'll be talking a little bit about this and the European project, and also about political participation within our European project and how this is important. And it's part of this political participation that the election for this circle, where I am a candidate, is happening. So Damian is very engaged on this aspect of citizen empowerment and political participation. So the conversation will revolve around these topics, and please feel free to comment or to make any contributions through Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. We can see your comments here and we can bring them in. And we also have some journalists tonight with us, and you will be having the opportunity to place some specific questions that we will prioritize as well to address. And but maybe before we start, I would like to share with all of you, with all those that are live today, a video that we have that has been very popular, our Tempo de Antena, so the video that we are streaming live, not live, but we are streaming on TV, about Volt. Shall we stream it now, Anna? Okay, that's the introduction of the video. It's a kickstart to it. It's been quite successful. So maybe let's get started with our chat. Damian, we were talking earlier about about migration in the EU and how many Europeans have found an opportunity in the European project to be able to address issues related with social inequality. We know that member states have very different standards economically, and for us in Portugal, this has been a problem, a chronic problem, and the European project has been a runway, actually, a solution to problems of poverty or social economic disadvantage. You've been fighting in the European Parliament for a more cohesive union, both internally but also externally with other human beings outside of the EU. And maybe we can start talking about the idea of a federal union and how, as a federalist party, and how this can be a solution to tackle or resolve our inequalities that affect millions of us now particularly us in Portugal?
Yeah, I think it's a super interesting topic, no, because it has a lot of dimensions. It has the dimension of like, why are people actually, if you want, forced to move or incentivized to move, whatever your perspective is, yeah. And whether the root causes for that, and also what do we do with the fact that people are moving and should be free to move across the European Union, and what kind of rights and maybe also duties should they have when they come to like another member state of the Union. I think it's such a fundamental issue of the European Union as a whole, as a construct, that I think it's super important to talk about. Maybe just like a super quick, economics check on, where do social inequalities also come from? And how does the EU deal with that? I think it's super interesting. Yeah? I mean, we talked a bit earlier about the financial crisis and how that actually, results on Europe as a whole, and how that also made some people move. And if I understand correctly, also you, Duarte, personally, were somehow basically a child of that generation of people that had to move because of the financial crisis. And I find that interesting because, I mean, I work in the European Union on the recovery fund, yeah, so the Corona recovery money. And this Corona recovery money, before Corona came, I also already worked on that, and it was back then called the Eurozone budget. And it comes from the idea that if you have, the same kind of currency union, if you have the euro, and you basically, you can't devalue your own currency, it's a bit technical, but like you can't basically change the currency values against each other within the same currency union. You need to have some form of an investment tool from the European Union's level to fight against the different, inequalities in the country. Or said in another word, I mean, if you're in a crisis, normally, like, your government needs to invest a lot of money to also pump yourself out of the crisis. That's like the idea of anti-cyclical investment. And but if you are a government that can't really borrow so much money, because then the financial markets will say, oh, they can't borrow so much money, they will default. And that's exactly what happened in the financial crisis in 2008 until 2012 or whatever. Then you're a bit stuck, yeah? Because the rich countries will be able to invest themselves out of the crisis, and those with less ability to borrow will be less able to do that, and that makes it even more unequal in between the different countries. And so that's why I'm super happy that I was actually working on this Corona Recovery Fund, which was 673 billion euros. Which is a lot of, cash if you think about it, and it really helps a bit to equalize. So that's just a more theoretical economic analysis of why is there an inequality between the different countries and how can you actually counter it. And I think the Corona Recovery Fund is a very good example. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Duarte, and if not, we can go into the actual question of what kind of rights and duties people have.
Exactly. No, I think this is a really good example leading on also to a notion of a federal Europe. And I think this notion is something that I understand in Portugal in this campaign is something that is not so well understood. But here is a good example on, if you compare how the EU addressed the financial crisis 10 years ago and how the EU is addressing now the Corona crisis, and now being a more collaborative effort and the EU being on the forefront rather than some member states like before, we have a much more socially fair package to invest where it's most needed, rather than a very tight and based on austerity principles solutions. So I think this is a good solution, and it actually reminds me that in the campaign here in Portugal, in the national campaign, some parties have been talking about the issue of migration of Portuguese young people and a brain drain of Portuguese qualified people leaving Portugal, because in Portugal the salaries are very low. And Volt wants to, and it's part of its electoral manifesto, Volt has solutions to grow the economy integrated within the EU, and especially in areas where we have higher competitiveness in sectors of the future, to be able to grow this economy here in the context of Europe so that people can have better salaries. And I think
just to maybe, sorry to jump in on this, I think we should also be aware that this exists within every country. Yeah, I mean, you have obviously maybe, I don't know, Portugal's economy so well, but probably I would guess that Lisbon or Porto is a more economically developed area than other areas in Portugal. So, and that's true for Germany as well. Yeah, I mean, we have obviously Eastern Germany, which is a bit often in many areas a bit weaker economically, but also in Western Germany we have areas which Wuppertal, whatever, you don't have to know them, but which are a bit weaker economically. So this is an issue that every kind of federation has, and therefore I think it's also really cool that Volt stands for investment in disadvantaged areas or challenged areas or whatever you want to call these areas. And then it's not so much about country versus country, but it's really understanding that we live on this continent, and there are some economically more advanced or richer areas, and there are some which I think need some more investment or a bit of a strategy, and they would try to even get this away from the national notion a bit, so that it's not so much rich Germans or Dutch or whatever, but it's more like saying, okay, we are one economy. How do we best make use of the fact that we have so much diversity, so many different ideas and products, and how can we become better on that, I think.
Exactly. And some countries like Portugal have a smaller economy, but there are areas where we are very competitive in Europe. For example, on renewables, we are a top 10 country in terms of our mix of energy, and we don't have nuclear. So we are in a situation that in the future we might be able to grow a sector here to help other countries in the EU with their strategy for a carbon neutral economy. So this is actually part of our program, our manifesto for Portugal for this national election, and it's exactly thinking Europe as a whole and finding opportunities to build prosperity for all, like for the countries that are already richer that also have their needs, and for the countries that are not so rich. And potentially, perhaps we can now move on to a topic that is very important for this circle here. We call it Circle of Europe in Portugal. It's the constituency of Portuguese expats in Europe, which is political participation, which I know is one of your favorite topics, Damian. And in Portugal, we have this unique situation in Europe. I think only France has two, of having a representation in our parliament on behalf of Portuguese migrants or Portuguese expats, two for Europe and two for outside of Europe. And one of the debates that has been happening is that even though we are 1 million in Europe registered, but we are expected to be more, we only have 2 MPs out of 230. And Volt wants to increase this representation. And this representation has also been lost in the political partisan politics, as in the elected members, they join the partisan politics and they don't really stand on behalf of Portuguese expats. Maybe we can talk about what you think about national representation of Portuguese expats or expats of any nation.
Earlier you said that there's 24% of the Portuguese population abroad in Europe.
Yeah, 26%. Yes.
In Europe.
So we have registered 1 million, which would be 10%, but we know that it's much more than the registered. So it's probably 26%, so a fourth.
You cannot not represent these people. But I think it's cool that you even have these, 2 or 4 in total people who represent experts, and I think it's already quite progressive. But yes, I think it definitely makes sense to increase that representation. Yeah? So I fully support that. I think it makes, from my perspective at least, a lot of sense. And the question is, obviously, like the national representation, but also then the representation that you have in the countries where you then have your residence in the other EU countries. And I think that's also something that I look at very much in detail. I guess you were getting at that also a bit more. And there, what kind of levels do we have? We have the local, regional, national, and European elections that you could potentially vote in, or even stand as a candidate in. Yeah? These are the two basic rights in democracy. And on the local level, that's already possible. So you can actually vote, and I think also stand on the local level, so that's possible. But then on the regional and national level, it's very often not possible. and I mean, I remember campaigning in the Bundestag elections, so the German national elections, a couple of months ago, and talking to someone in perfect German, like without any accent, who told me that they have been living in Germany for like 7-8 years or something like that, and have been paying taxes for 7-8 years, but didn't have the chance to influence who would govern Germany in the future. So, and that, I mean, I think that's just ridiculous, and we have to really get over this, because this is not serious. If you think about a federal union where you have the freedom to move, if you don't have the right to be represented and to somehow influence what your society looks like that you live in, I think that makes no sense.
Yes, we have the same fight in Belgium, actually, because the amount of people in Brussels, where I live, that are not Belgian citizens, and we can't even vote for the regional election, which is, in the case of Brussels, is really the city life. So these are loopholes. And for example, as a candidate, I am Portuguese. I only have political rights in Portugal, and I live outside. So if any citizen that doesn't live in their national country wants to do something in politics, it has to be through the their national identity, and this is a limitation.
And that stops people from doing it, like, I mean, obviously.
Yeah, exactly, because you can't, and potentially, like, people outside of Portugal, whilst they're also very interested in politics in Portugal, they can be, it's their national country, but they also want to have a say in the country that they live, for sure.
I think what I always find interesting, and what also was actually one of the reasons why I founded Volt, or why I didn't say no when Andrea pushed me to think with him, was that I always thought like the worst thing that can happen is that we make people interested in politics and actually engage in political parties, which we also hadn't been. And so I'm like, obviously for me, it's a super important point to make it a very low threshold to become politically active, because I think, I mean, I probably said this number to you before, but like since the 1980s, party membership in Europe has halved. So people are not going to parties anymore, they're not joining anymore. And now with what you're saying, I'm thinking actually that could also be the case because people are moving more across Europe, and so they don't really feel like I want to be in this national party that in a country where I'm not even allowed to vote and probably not allowed to stand as a candidate. So I think, I mean, it's just dumb to create this hurdle for people to become politically active, and we already have a shortage of people who want to become politically active. So I really think it's something to change.
Yes. And one of the changes that Volt wants to bring into Portugal, into our electoral system, is actually, you're probably very familiar with, because it's inspired on the German model to have two things: to have a point system, so that people can choose across different parties and don't be led by what we call a voto útil, which is the useful vote. Like, I want to choose the prime minister. Strategic vote. I want to choose a prime minister or the chancellor, so therefore I'm not going to vote for Volt, even though I like Volt or other parties. And then in parallel with this, have a compensation circle like you have in Germany, to ensure that no votes go to the rubbish bin, as we say. Because in Portugal, a lot of votes, for example, in this circle, we elect 2 MPs. If you don't get elected, these votes count for nothing. And it really, I think, when we talk about political participation, and Portugal has very high abstention rates in this circle, just to let you know, 90% of people, of the expats, have not voted. Only 10% vote. So, and in the country, it varies between 60% to 40% abstention rates. If you feel that your vote is going to go to the rubbish bin, or if you feel that you're voting for someone that you actually don't want to vote, but you need to choose a prime minister or avoid somebody else, then how can democracy be appealing? How can democracy make sense?
I mean, I fully understand that. I think the worst, the worst example for me of a system that really makes a lot of votes, or like loses a lot of votes, is obviously the British first past the post system. I mean, they would probably not be happy that I say this, but like you can see there how many votes of people that just didn't win the seat in that specific constituency, but were like the second or so, completely distorts the whole political landscape. And I think that's why it's really good to think about proportional systems at all times, systems where you know that your vote will in some way be represented, or the share of the population that is green or that is volt or that is social democratic or conservative or whatever, that they will be represented to a certain extent. I think that's how democracy should work. So I think it's a super good proposal. And the other thing, that we have also been talking about, that I think can really increase participation, is voting age 16. Like if you actually allow younger people to vote, then they will potentially start getting more interested in politics from an earlier age, and actually start getting active when they have the energy and will and time. And so I think it could also be a super important. I mean, what's the voting age currently in Portugal?
It's 18, but we also are proposing 16 as a way of encouraging younger people to get involved. Actually, we know some people that would like to vote, and I don't think people should be at the age of 16. I think it makes sense. I think Austria already has this in place, the age of 16. So I see we start having some questions here. So maybe we can also make it more interactive with people that are watching us.
I read one where there's a question of whether there should be more of a harmonization of how experts can vote.
Yes. So Paulo Costa from the Também Somos Portugueses movement asks, in the elections for the European Parliament, each country decides how people vote. Portuguese expats have to vote on the consulates, but the Greeks have to go to Greece. Would an harmonization be possible? So can this be a federal solution to the problem?
I mean, I tell you, so I'm currently negotiating the European Electoral Law Act, which basically defines how the European elections should work. And it's extremely complicated because, there are a lot of interests. The countries have different ideas of how this should work. And the way it works is that we, as the European Parliament, we make a proposal and write a text of how it should be done. And then the 27 governments need to figure out what they think, and then we have to negotiate a bit on how to make this work. And a lot of countries really don't like if you tell them how to organize their electoral systems. It seems to be very different traditions in different countries, and so it's extremely difficult. So when I use the word harmonization, people literally stumble back out of the room. So I have used a little trick. I now talk about minimum standards. So I don't talk about harmonization anymore. I talk about minimum standards. And so the only thing that we can currently do in this political context is to say, like, look, you need to have a fair and easy access to be able to vote. And then the question is, does the European Court still think that Greece sending their citizens back to Greece is really equal and fair access? Probably not. So this is a bit like the way that I'm trying to do it right now, saying like, okay, democratic standards, yes. And the interesting thing is you can convince a lot of the countries by saying like, look, you say you don't care how, let's say, random example, how Estonia elects their MEPs. Yeah? You could say, like, I don't care about it as a Portuguese person, how Estonia elects their MEPs. But I mean, these Estonian MEPs write laws for Portuguese people as well, because we're in the European Parliament, we write laws for all of Europe. So I'm trying to convince people a bit to say, like, look, you should really care about the fact that there are good democratic standards in all member states, because if they're not, then people get into power in politics that have been voted in by weird procedures or not fully representing the Greek people or whomever. And so that's my angle currently. But I can tell you it's the electoral law is full of emotions and national traditions. So you have to like wiggle your room or wiggle your way through the room a bit.
But this, I think, is a really good example, and I like the minimum standards way of introducing it, because I think when we think about a federal Europe, it's not just a vague, distant concept. It's things like this: electoral systems. How do we make sure that a parliament that represents everyone is elected in fair conditions for everyone? And a federal system has the tools to implement it, but now we can't because we are based on intergovernmental. Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting.
No, go ahead. You are the MEP.
No, but that doesn't give me the right to interrupt. But I think I get very emotional about this topic, for multiple reasons. The first one is that, I mean, if you actually look at how candidates in different parties across Europe are put on lists to be elected by citizens, you see very different ideas. I mean, very often it's the head of a party who basically says, like, I like your face and you seem nice, so I put you on the list, I mean, I'm obviously overdoing it a bit, and then maybe they have a party assembly that actually votes on this list and confirms it, but very often that's not even the case. So I think to say, like, the first democratic standard is an internal democracy standard, of saying, like, if you want to run on a list, you should be having primaries, like internal votes on who is on what level of the list, and that's the first part. But then, I mean, with Volt, I had so many experiences of how democratic standards are weird. I mean, you probably know this example, but 150,000 signatures to run for the European elections in Italy, that's just ridiculous. Like, nobody has ever collected these signatures, and only old parties are therefore allowed to run, and so there's all these barriers to entry to democracy. And I think, I mean, even though democracy is not such a sexy topic very often, because it's harder to campaign on, it's really also what I think makes Volt special, because we really care about democracy on all levels. Obviously, first and foremost, if you like, on the European level, to really have European democracy that works, and European parliamentary democracy where you have a European government that is really backed by the European Parliament, and it's able to fulfill whatever campaign promises the parties made that back it, and that can change also directions. So, I mean, these are all very important Volt points, but I think democracy and participation on all levels is really like a core topic for us. So I'm super happy that you're also campaigning on this now for Volt Portugal.
Yeah. Yes, this is a big, I mean, it's not on the media, but I see a lot of political parties are trying to introduce electoral system reforms. So if we get elected, I think there is momentum in the manifestos of other parties to find solutions, and our proposals can go through. But indeed, if we think it widely in Europe, I think we are more successful of introducing a full-on democracy for everyone in Europe. I'm going to bring another question, this time from Tiago Pinto Paes. He's a journalist from Portugal Post. It's a German newspaper for the Portuguese diaspora. And Tiago asks, how does the harmonization...
I said, willkommen.
Willkommen. How does the harmonization of policies work among the different national structures of Volt?
So that's a super interesting issue. So basically, when we started working on setting up Volt, in the beginning we were 3, and then we started writing a bit of the program, and then we realized, okay, this is going to be a longer process. And in the end, it took almost 2.5 years to write the first foundation program of Volt with 270 pages. So it really grew a bit in its way, because we always thought that the difference between a populist party and an actual, serious party is that the populist doesn't have anything that they hold, themselves accountable to, whereas we very clearly said in detail for like a lot of topics, or almost all that we could think of, what our position was. So that was important. But how do you organize a process across Europe at some point that works and ensures that there is, this foundation program? And for that, we really went through like a lot of ideas, and then decided that there needs to be like an ongoing improvement of the existing program. So it's basically, if you want a living program that can be updated, if there are enough members from the party across Europe that somehow want this to be updated, and then it goes through a process, and then it comes through different stages, and basically to a vote, and then becomes part of, if you want, our Bible or our foundation program. And then all electoral programs cannot contradict this foundation program. So it doesn't matter if you have now like Duarte, like a program specifically for Portugal, or for the expert community of Portugal, or it doesn't matter if you run for the European Parliament and we have this one program, then if you run for the European Parliament from all countries, the same program, or if it's, a national election in Germany or something like this. And for me, that's really important to ensure the coherence, and that we basically have the same ideas that we run on. And if there's uncertainty, then we have procedures to also find out, what could be our position if our foundation program is not so clear. So Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of a process nerd, so I really love thinking about how to make it efficient and very democratic and work across Europe. And so I get a bit nerdy when I talk about this.
It's work in progress, but really I could not emphasize the fact that this is what makes Volt extremely unique and extremely special. I find this is why I joined, and this is why I'm running as a candidate, which is we really have, or we are doing our best to implement a structure to have a common political manifesto for Europe. And obviously the level of European politics is the European institutions and European elections, but we do bring this down to national, regional, and local elections. And I invite everybody, through the transparency of our party, you can go to our website and you can check the mapping of policies, the document that Damian was referring to, and you can see what we stand for across Europe, and then this has national applications. And our manifesto for this election was very much inspired on the mapping of policies document and all the other policies that are currently being, well, some are already official and are going into the MOP, the mapping of policies. Some are being discussed. It's very, very active on that level. There's one final question, then we finish. This question is quite relevant for us because it's one of our proposals for this circle, which is about remote voting electronically. Is remote electronic voting in the democratic standards of elections? Is it a safe and democratic way of voting?
So I have to say that I thought a lot about this, and in the end I decided that I would like to push for it. And today I actually had a breakfast because we sit in one committee together and work on like an artificial intelligence report with the former Prime Minister of Estonia, Andrus Ansip. And I mean, they have been voting electronically the first time in 2003. Wow. Sorry, I have to correct myself. I thought it's 2003. He told me it's 2005. So since 2005, 2005. And I mean, that's insane. That's almost 20 years that they have been improving and testing their procedures to have online voting. By now, 50% in the last election of the citizens voted online. 50 digitally, 50%. And I was like, oh my God, you know, like if you have so much time to improve your systems and like you just work on it, I mean, this is really, and the system is perfect. Yeah, it's like he uses all these, you know, split key, blockchain, I mean, I couldn't even follow all like that, but you can see, you can check your own vote, but nobody can check your vote. You can see whether your vote has been counted towards the election results, but nobody else can see your vote. I mean, it's really like 100%, you know, foolproof basically. And he says they also have sometimes signature collections for issues for Parliament to care about. And it happens regularly that 95% of citizens support a certain initiative. 95%, because why? Because they just press yes on their phone. And then like they have the signature for a certain issue. And then, you know, obviously politicians know what's going on. Yeah, so it's not liquid democracy, but still, I mean, I think we really should be getting better, and we should be more innovation friendly, and remote voting for sure is a really good way to do that. And I think it's ridiculous that we still get stuck at the concerns. I think you should take the concerns seriously, and then you should mitigate them. You know, that's a risk that you look at, and then you find the best technological solutions. And maybe, you know, once there's a bit of a glitch, for example, in Estonia, at some point the Russians hacked their system, and then almost all fell down, but they were able to back up it and then learn from it, and then it was fine. You know, there was no major harm done. So I think, you know, we have to be a bit more open to try things, maybe in smaller scale, and then really get them out. But I mean, since it works in Estonia, I would just say let's take the Estonian model and use it in Europe.
Exactly. Exactly. I always say this, like Estonians have been doing it for almost 20 years. I thought it was later, actually. And it works, and it's in the EU. We should learn from them, and because we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We have one last question, and that's for me, and then we'll finish. And this is, if elected, what would be the first measure you would propose, or what is the most urgent set of measures to implement? So at my campaign, the two main priorities are, well, the main priority is to give voice to the Portuguese diaspora. And this, for me, has two levels. One is to resolve these basic elements of a state of law, of a democracy, in which people can participate. So the first measure on that would be to start the pilot project to have electronic voting, as we were seeing from the example of Estonia, running in Portugal, so that in the next election, we would be able to safely have electronic remote voting. We have a midterm election for the Council of Portuguese Communities. This is an opportunity to test and to bring it on for Portuguese expats for sure in the next election in 4 years. Also increase the size of MPs from the expats, and with this, really give voice and really say, you have a voice here, we want to hear from you. But then as an MP, what I want to is also bring the perspective of the people that are outside of the country in the main national policies of the country. When we think about the economy and in ways that the economy can attract people to move back to Portugal, if they choose to, it's a free choice. To think about the reform on a tax system so that people are not discriminated for the fact that they live outside, as it happens now. In the reform of the social security, to make sure that people, if they lose their job or if they decide to retire, they can go to Portugal and use their contributions from outside. This already is in place in the EU, but it really doesn't work in Portugal very well. And there's a lot of hurdles to do this. And also in terms of transportation, we have a national airline that was nationalized, and we have special conditions for people living in the islands in Portugal. I would suggest that we should have special conditions for Portuguese people living outside, because sometimes in an emergency, our national airline is really way more expensive than all the other market prices. And in the end, we have a national airline that was paid with taxpayers' money with the reason that we have a big diaspora, but actually it doesn't really serve the diaspora. So I want to be a voice for the Portuguese expats. I want to make a difference, because I find that this voice has not been there before from previous representation. And in this way, make people feel that they matter, no matter if they are not in Portugal, and we can build a better life even for people that are outside of our national borders.
Nice.
Good. So this is it. Thank you so much, Damian, for spending so much time of your busy week here. I'm gonna start wrapping up. I don't know if you want to say anything else before we close.
No, I think the one thing, apart from voting for Duarte, which you all probably now understand makes a lot of sense, is just to also consider, when you're listening to this, to get politically active in ways that are possible for you. Because I really care about the fact that we are somehow forgetting that politics is the way how to solve societal and climate and economic issues, whatever issues you care about. And I really want people to find that way again, or like find it interesting again to get politically active, to solve the issues that we have together. And I think that would be my little call for action apart from obviously voting for Portugal in the next elections.
Thank you so much, Damian. Thank you for your time. And don't forget, those of you until the 30th with your postal vote, or in Portugal, vote the vote. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.